Okay, so this last section, I want to start off with this discussion of Von Ryan's ideas around parenting. And what she was trying to do is really classify styles of parenting. And these styles could be from different cultures and they can manifest or look a whole bunch of different ways. But what she's saying is that a consistency that you tend to see is, or one thing that you can kind of rate or characterize between families is how much do you see clear rules that are fair and enforced consistently? And how much do you see warm affection? So I would have you think of this idea of like, say, if I was to have you to go in and rate every family, we're going to assume that the parents love the kids. Like, you're not rating if they actually love their kids. What you're rating is, do you see any outward examples of positive emotion? And every time you do, you make it tick. And do you see any evidence of specific kind of rules of the house? And if you do, you make it tick. So I want you to think of those two kind of dimensions. And we're going to look at this in relation to some TV families. Okay, so the first one, I want you to see this word authoritarian, right? And you can see that most of the word authoritarian is just the word authority. And an authoritarian, like a Canadian or an American, that "and" at the end is like that is what you are, that it's typified or it's characterized by authority. And so, for example, I'm using not really the mom in that 70s show. It doesn't make as much sense for her. I'm focusing on the dad, Red Foreman. And he's in that 70s show, which is like literally, you can tell by the title, an attempt to make a show that's sort of characteristic of what life in America was like in the 70s. And he's sort of representing this like strict, hard nosed dad, right? That's like loves his kids, but isn't really necessarily showing it. There's not a lot of outward expression of emotion. So you would score him as pretty low on outward expressed emotion, but you would score him as high in rules. So in these families, it's more restrictive, more punishment based. Kids are expected to listen to the parent. Listen to me when I'm talking to you is a common phrase. And so if you're taking notes, you would say that this would be an example of where there's a lot of rules and enforcement of rules, but not a lot of outward display of emotion. Now, keep in mind, I had made the point that like Kitty or like the mom would score differently. I'm talking about the dad here. Okay, so that's my example of authoritarian, authority based, not a lot of outward expression of positive emotion. Now, authoritative, and my critique of Bunrein's style is that styles is one of them is that the language is tricky because these are so similar. This is like the easiest test question for me to ask you would be some kind of question that was looking at the difference between these two, like authoritarian, authoritative, right? Iv means something different than in. It means like that it's like that. This is like an authoritarian parent in the sense that there's rules, but there's also much more expressions of love. And I'm actually using Uncle Phil as the example in this. I actually just realized I'm using the dad in all four examples, and maybe I can switch that for next time. Um, Uncle Phil, it's like how many episodes of Fresh Prince ended with like Uncle Phil putting his arm around Will with some kind of life lesson. You can probably maybe predict I'm going to be saying this is sort of the ideal, that authoritative parents are trying to encourage independence, but still putting limits on and some controls on. Authoritative parents encourage children to be independent, but still put some limits and controls on their actions. There tends to be more extensive verbal back and forth. Parents are warm and nurturant towards their children. An authoritative parent might put their arm around the kid in a comforting way and say, you shouldn't have done that, but let's talk about how to handle the situation better next time. Authoritative parents show pleasure and support in response to their children's constructive behavior. They also expect independent, age appropriate behavior. Children whose parents are authoritative are often more cheerful, self controlled, self reliant, and achievement oriented, tend to maintain more friendly relationships, collaborate better with other adults, and deal well with stress. Okay. So in the third style, neglectful, and sometimes referred to as uninvolved. And I'm using the example of Al Bundy from Married with Children. You might know him as the grandpa on Modern Family, which is kind of his more recent role. When he was earlier in his career, he played kind of like the idiot dad on this comedy show, right? And Married with Children was a huge show. It was, I remember still when it was on Sunday nights after The Simpsons. It was like Simpsons was 8 o'clock, and then Married with Children was 8:30. And to have the time slot right after The Simpsons, back in the days before PVRs and recording TV and streaming and all that, when like if you didn't see The Simpsons on Sundays, you didn't see The Simpsons. Neglectful parenting is a style in which the parent is uninvolved in the child's life, or at least less involved. Children whose parents are neglectful can develop a sense that other parents that aspects of the parents' lives are more important than they are. These children tend to be less skilled socially, have poorer self-control, and don't handle independence as well. They can frequently struggle with low self-esteem, immaturity, and be alienated. In adolescence, they often show patterns of truancy and delinquency. And so you could probably guess I'm presenting this as the least ideal. And then my fourth example of the indulgent parent or the permissive parent. And I'm using, from the best show ever made, The Sopranos. So in case you haven't seen it, like The Sopranos follows the life and the story of Tony Soprano, who's like sort of really roughly, not specifically, but roughly based off of like John Gotti. He's like the head of the mob, but he's actually an super interesting character, because not only is he this like high up mobster, but he also, and you learn this in like the very first episode, he also is having panic attacks. And because he's having these intense panic attacks, he's going to see a therapist, this female therapist, and his relationship or his like interactions with his therapist, his therapy sessions are amazing. They're like so classic. It's like such a dichotomy, because it's this guy that's like this rough, tough guy, but then he's also having these incredibly vulnerable moments. And it's one of the reasons The Sopranos is such an awesome show. The way that it's a show about his life, but he's also going to therapy about his life, and they're showing it, and it's like a huge aspect of the show, adds this really neat dimension. But if you see Meadow there, his daughter, who he loves and he gives everything to, but she has no rules. She's allowed to do whatever. She has like, it's like she has permission to do whatever. And that's where you can see the word permissive. Parents are involved with the child, but very few demands on or controls on their behavior. They can indulge them, like do the thing that you want. In this style of parenting, parents let their children do what they want. Some parents deliberately raise their children this way because they believe that this combination of a warm environment and few restraints will make a more confident, creative child. However, children whose parents are indulgent rarely learn to respect others and can have difficulty controlling their behavior, especially in intense situations. They can become egocentric, non-compliant, and can have unsatisfactory relationships with friends. So I found this, I just added this before I started this recording, and I'm realizing that blown up, it's like all a little bit hard to read. But I just wanted to kind of show you that it's really on just this continuum, right? Like, do you see high levels of control and high levels of warmth? Then we're talking about authoritative. Is it high levels of control but low levels of warmth? Then we're talking about authoritarian. Is it low levels of control but high levels of warmth, and then it's permissive? Or is it low levels and low levels and then it's uninvolved? So it's just like kind of in diagram there for you. I'll just take a coffee break and leave this up in case you want to write or draw any of that. You don't need to. I just use this as a picture to kind of help explain it. Oh yeah, I'm recording this part nighttime by a beautiful moonlit lake. That's totally not a Zoom background. Okay. Oh, this is kind of depressing slide. That also another thing to talk about is that like there can be development can be heavily influenced by maltreatment, and some of that maltreatment could be physical, it could be neglect based, it could be in some of the worst scenarios sexually related, or and in other scenarios emotionally related. There's no single cause for child mistreatment, but it's obviously heavily linked with things like parent stress, the way that almost said the way the child acts. And I can understand how someone might hear that and say that I'm almost blaming the child, but I'm not, because it's the parent's fault if that's the situation. But you could see how the scenario would be more likely in scenarios where the child's like super defiant and super aggressive and irrational even with their own behavior, and how that could heighten situations that, yeah, the culture and the characteristics of the family, the stage that the kid's at, and things like parenting stress, substance use, how isolated people are. Right? Like I heard that during the first year of the pandemic lockdowns, because it was the lockdowns that hurt people more, that the socially, that what happened with the lockdowns in England in the first year, there was 1 million people that were considered new alcoholics. So 1 million people in just a country the size of England that before the pandemic would have been considered casual drinkers, and after the pandemic were considered alcoholics. And you got to think like, what's the ripple effect of 1 million parents becoming alcoholics? And is that really part of the epidemic? Or the, you know, bite my tongue. So the experience of family and childhood. So one interesting thing is if you were to take kids of different ages and put them in different situations and then have somebody take notes every time the kids are fighting about something, the person that would have the most notes would be the person observing 2 to 4 year olds, especially boys. If you have two boys that are 2 to 4 and you're watching for any kind of sign of conflict, it's going to be like even less than 10 minutes. That says 10 minutes because it's not specifying gender. Now, it might just be like they both want to use the same toy or they argue over what they're going to do next or whatever, right? But it's very common. As they get to like 5, 7, it tends to go down less as people get better able to explain themselves. So I'm just kind of saying like some of the experience of childhood is like, well, how is family experience? Are there other siblings in the house? Is there a lot of conflict with those siblings? Because obviously that's going to affect the regulation ability of the individual kid. Is there only one parent in the house? What kind of job does that parent have? And what really affects the kid is how stressed is mom or dad when they get home from work? That things like stepchildren or step families and uh, divorce can lead to situations where there's adjustment problems. And you should know this, that one of the biggest things that kids deal with as a negative from divorce is a switch from authoritative to permissive parenting. That again, it's like painfully easy to see how it would happen. It's like if I only got to see my kids sometimes, and then when I see them, I want to make it as good as possible, and I want to let them eat what they want to eat, and they can stay up late and do all these things that if I was with them every day would be bad routines. But when I only see them sometimes and I'm trying to maximize our experience, it's understandable why I would do it. The break in routine, the switch from authoritative to permissive parenting styles. Beyond that, the kids are also now at a stage where their social world's much larger. I say it's like expanding to include peers and teachers and others, and they're spending less time with their parents. It's like this shows that like this from the textbook, but like Canada, it's something like 15% of kids that are 18, under 18 and living at home have only one parent in the home. In the States, it's almost as high as 25%. As children grow older, they spend an increasing amount of time with their peers. And, we can consider a peer as somebody that's basically at the same maturity level. Good peer relationships. This is why, again, it's like, not to be like old man mainland kicking a dead horse, but it's like, why the lockdown, one of the reasons it was so devastating on kids is because there's social emotional development that needs to happen in the presence of peers that's impossible to copy through Zoom. Back and forth reciprocity. That's so key to understanding things like competition, cooperation, loyalty, all these like high-end social values. Okay, just a few more points here. And to just continue my rant, if I was to say, like, well, what did kids miss? Like, if I'm saying it's so important for kids to be around other kids, why? Well, first of all, they need the companionship. They need the actual friendship that actually grounds them and makes them feel more safe. It reduces anxiety. They need the stimulation. They need the, hey, you want to come do this? Hey, check this out. Did you see this? Hey, let's go. All those cues to engage the world. It's like kids need to be around other kids because other kids push them to play. And the act of playing reduces anxiety and builds skill. They're actually learning how to use their body. They're learning who they are. That's like physical support, ego support. Ego support is them learning who they are. Ego and self are very similar words. Self has an ego, which is another way of saying the deepest part of who you are has an identity. Your ego, you are not your identity. You're a human being that has an identity. And what has an identity is yourself. And that discussion of between what's the difference between ego and self is actually best done by Carl Jung in a book and an essay called Ion. Next term, I have a presentation for you called Ion, same topic. And I'm going to try to present to you Jung's discussion of what's the difference between the identity mask and the mask wearer. What's the difference between the ego and the self? Ion is the Greek god that exists outside of time, whereas Chronos or chronological is the exists within time. And so he's using this reference to Greek mythology. And I'll explain this way more later. But like, it's this idea of like sorry, that got hardcore off point. And again, if I was recording this as a PowerPoint, I'd probably restart this slide. I got lost with that word ego. They also need the social comparison. They need to be around other kids. They need the affection. They need the intimacy. They need the friendship. Kids need to be around kids. There's no developmental substitute. Okay. I come around the corner. Pretend I'm like 7 years old, and I come around the corner and I see this scene, right? I see this one guy standing up like this, and then the two girls. And let's say that the girl that's like furthest back, I'm making this up obviously, but I tried to pick a picture, that's a tongue twister, that could help me illustrate this point. So let's say I'm a kid, I turn the corner and say I'm the same age. This isn't like some creepy example. And that's like the kid, that's like the girl that I have a crush on or whatever. And it's like, I can see that she's laughing. And I'm wondering, is she laughing because of something he said? And did he just say something about me? And he's acting like, oh, there he is. It's like, did he just say something cool? Did he just say something that I'm like happy? Am I going to give him a high five and come into this conversation? Or are they making fun of me and I'm going to walk past and feel bad about this? My point is that this is all I'm talking about, something that's going to be happening in your cognitive system processing in splits of seconds. You're coming around the corner and you're selectively attending to certain social cues. First of all, you're noticing that she's smiling, but that she's not looking at you, and that the other friend is, and that they probably both know you're there. And if maybe he just told her something about you or something, and she doesn't want you to know that. So like you're like totally noticing all those points of it. But then you also notice that he's like looking very friendly and not looking like he feels guilty for just maybe he actually is just being nice. I'm on part two here. I'm attributing intent. I'm saying maybe he's actually doing this because he's nice, or maybe he's doing it because he's making fun of me. That's intent. So then I'm saying, okay, so I'm analyzing the situation. I'm analyzing why the situation is the situation that it is. That's two. Number three, I'm saying, okay, maybe he's being cool. So I want to be cool here. He's reaching out his hand like he's going to do like a high five. Remember, this is all in a split of a split of a split of a second. You would only be able to actually see this if you really slowed down the cognitive chain of events. So then there's a goal generated. Okay, so he's going like this. So I want to give him a five. And it's weird. My hands get all glitchy because I'm using a virtual background. So I'm like, okay, so when people have went like this to me before, I've went like this too, and like, given him a handshake or a five or whatever, a fist bump or whatever the situation, right? So then my goal is to do that. So then I access the memorized behavior associated with that. So like put my hand out, boom. I'm not gonna like go so hard that I crush his hand. I'm not gonna go so light that he can't grab my hand. I know like how tight I'm gonna do my handshake without even thinking about it. It's just a memorized behavioral script. It's just a behavior I know how to do when my brain tells me this is the situation to do that. Remember, this is all unconscious. It's not like the kids like step one, step two, step three. It's like this is all happening so fast. They make the decision then, and they enact the behavior. So it's like you attend to the cues, you figure out why they are what the way they are, you make your goal, you access the script about how to do the behavior associated with your goal, you make the decision and you do the behavior. And those are the 6 steps in social information processing. And if you sort of got my story, it's like you do this 100 times a day. You're constantly involved in the 6-step process. It's how you socially process information too, not just how younger kids do. Why is play important for kids? Why do kids have to be around other kids? Why can kids not be at home by themselves on Zoom as a replacement for school? Because anxiety is released through play. It's not released through Zoom. Kids need to play with other kids because it's directly related to anxiety. Thus, if you were to restrict that play, what do you think happens to anxiety levels? That we actually can release some of our pent up tension when we're playing. And as adults, we play too. Like if you're playing music with your friends, like we literally say play music, play sports. It's like, even when you're just joking around with your friends, it's like you're being silly. It's almost like you're playing like you're a kid. And it's like there's a therapeuticness to that. That kids need to play with each other because it lets them get rid of their feelings of being uncomfortable. And it also helps them learn how to figure out, say, their cope with problems and deal with stuff. It's like for a kid, you can look at anxiety as being a little bit less thought based and a little bit more like a confused energy, that needs to be processed. It's like, and I don't mean to downplay this at all by making an animal comparison, but it's like go buy a husky and put your husky in a small apartment all day and see what happens. And don't walk it, and it'll tear that apartment apart. Take that same dog, it could even live in the same apartment, but you take it for a long run every morning. It won't destroy the apartment at all, probably, or at least a lot less. It's like, why? Because that exercise burnt off the anxiety, burnt off that stored negative angst. And angst and anxiety are the same word, or the same idea. For young children, imaginary play is also real. And by this, I mean that, like, for my nephews in the backyard playing with sticks, pretending that they're fighting the dragon, it's like that imagined situation is just as real as any daydream you have. It's like that's actually a highly impressive shared cognitive experience. They're actually both playing into the same made up mental world. It's actually as high of creative cognition as is almost possible for their brains at that age. It's actually related to continuing brain development. It's as healthy of a thing as they could be doing. Okay, in terms of types of play, so some play, like, so say like like when my daughter was a baby, that her play was more just like touching things and like even putting things in her mouth, or like seeing like what things do. It was very like sense based. It was very like touch, sensory motor behaviors that allow an infant to derive pleasure from exercising their sensory motor schemes. They're starting to see like, oh, I can turn this upside down, or I can push this away, and I can fall this over, and this is a ball, so when I set it down it rolls, and that's interesting. Other things don't roll, and like this thing's a bit sharp, but then this thing's smooth, and then this thing's soft, and then this thing's wrinkly, and it's like, oh, that's actually their brain learning. It's like all play and brain development go together. Play and brain development go together, and play and anxiety reduction go together. Practice play is just like kind of this idea of like learning things. It's like my daughter, my 2-year-old, playing with like teacups and stuff. She's like almost repeating a behavior she's seeing adults do. It's not surprising that a lot of kids play like house or play school kind of based games. And part of the reason is because it provides a play context to practice behaviors they're seeing adults doing. It's actually super deep. I just stumbled into like symbolic play, where a child transforms the environment into like a symbolic environment. So like an example is like directly above me. So I'm in like the basement area, and then I call it the office, and then right above me is the toy room, right? So it's like where it's my daughter's office. If you ask my daughter what that is, it's her classroom. That's an example of a symbolic play environment. My daughter likes to come home after school and line up her dolls and kind of teach her dolls what she learned during the day. And I've kind of started to give her a lot of space to do that, because I kind of believe that that's a healthy way of her processing. And sometimes I'll eavesdrop a little bit because I don't know. She's like my little angel, right? So sometimes I'll like eavesdrop and be like, I'll hear her talking to her doll about like something that she heard at school or something someone told her. And it's just interesting how she's processing through play. And she'll be less anxious when she's done playing. Okay, which ones did I talk about? Social play. Like social play is independent play is good. And independent play is important in developing things like attention span and task persistence. But there's only so much that the child is designed, developed, evolved to need other kids in their life. Constructive play again is like the same, like even my daughter constructing this whole like school environment, and this whole like there's that piece of it. But then even like my little kid like doing stuff with blocks and puzzles and stuff, that's an example of constructive play too. This, and notice this has the word sensory motor too. It's also like learning it's through play that you learn your body better. You develop eye hand better. By playing all these games, you're also getting better at making your hands do what your eye is demanding. You're like, it's like training your physical system, but you're lost in just the enjoyment of it. And that's why it's got this magical developmental quality, because play is different than other behavior because it's not goal oriented. You could even have that in your notes, maybe, that what's definitional of play is it's behavior that's engaged in for its own sake. It's not goal oriented. It's not about sexual reproduction or finding food or finding safety and security or all these things that are kind of evolutionary drives. It's done for its own sake. And this leads to, and then just games, activities engaged in for pleasure. You all know what games are. It's just a type of playing. And this leads to my kind of last point, that like, not the games part, but just what I was saying right before that, that we actually see play in animals as a signal of intelligence, right? It's funny because I was at the store and just like a teacher PowerPoint clicker thing, they have like the lasers. It was like great for exercise for cats. And I'm like, my daughter's like, this would be good for exercise for him. And I was kind of like, okay, this is gonna be a wasted $10 or whatever it was. Does it ever work? This cat loves this. So I'll stand in the kitchen and I'll take this laser pointer and I'll run it up the stairs, and then the cat will chase it up the stairs, and I'll run downstairs and I'll chase it down the stairs through the kitchen, and then I'll put it down to the downstairs basement, because the kitchen's kind of, there's like, picture the kitchen on one end of it's the stairs that goes downstairs, on the other end the stairs go upstairs, so I can just switch in between. So then when he goes downstairs, I get him to chase back up, and then I run across and he follows the thing upstairs, downstairs, upstairs, downstairs, upstairs, downstairs 4 or 5 times. He's toast. He just wants to go sleep for like an hour after that. I burnt out all his pent up aggression, or angst, pent up angst and aggression. If he was aggressive, he's not aggressive. He's a super sweet cat. I meant to say angst. I burnt up all of his anxiety. That play did. Young mammals of all species play. There's even evidence of birds playing, right? So like ravens will fly into clouds that are really powerful and get thrown by them. And then they'll go do it again and again and again and again and again. And if you're watching them do it, there's no way to look at that and not see that they're doing it because they like it. Or there's videos you can find online too of ravens like sliding down hills of snow and stuff. It's like they're tobogganing, like they're doing things because, again, this is the point. It's play if it's not aimed at a specific result. Like if they were doing that because they're trying to figure out a way to slide down to get to some food source, it's like we would say that that's a goal-oriented behavior. That's not play. Free play in general is on the decline. More kids are playing like super structured or organized sports, and like, I don't know, I see the value in both. I came from an upbringing of very organized sports, like mainly soccer and hockey, mainly hockey. And I see a lot of benefits to that, but I also see tons of value in less structured play. Look at that last point, right? Just trying to be as on edgy as possible, but like increases in screen time, doing school on Zoom limits genuine and necessary social interaction. Okay. Quiz review. I'm going to do this as a standalone short video. So thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.